Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another incredible episode, just like always. And today, I think you guys know what the topic is going to be about, based on what I was tweeting about all weekend. And yes, we're going to be talking about the welfare strategy that a lot of people apparently think is the path to power. And I've got a commonly question about this, so I'll read that. It comes from K-Max. K-Max asks, Scott, the dissident right's idea of starving the beast, the government is the enemy, so whites should go on welfare, use EBD cards, and not join the military, not help this government that hates us do well in any way. Is this a losing strategy, Scott? Would you much rather we try and win? A government that hates us must be changed rather than brought down to its knees. This is the dissident right debate that we're having. I'm just going to focus mainly on the welfare thing. I've talked about the military and other things, because this is something separate. There is a part of that military like, oh, we leave, we don't join the military, we don't go to universities, we move to the middle of the nowhere, and we're building up power in the hinterlands, and then eventually the government is going to have to respect us. This is a general right-wing view. A lot of normal conservatives have these ideas as well. The welfare idea is specifically a white nationalist thing, and I'm not saying this is a pejorative. These are people who would declare themselves white nationalists. I mean, it was like people like Eric Stryker, people from the Lens Review comment section. I guess people on Telegram had really gotten upset about this. These were like old school like Gab accounts that hadn't got their upgrade since 2016 that were coming on there and demanding this. And I remember years ago, I would meet guys like this who are like, we need to fucking go on welfare. It's time to get what's ours. We're going to starve the beast, and like, you need to take any advantage of the system and be a parasite. And there were all these guys who are like this. Normal conservatives, even the ones who advocate for proletarianization, because proletarianization is something I'm going to talk about. This is advocated for by normal conservatives. The arguments about not going to college, even though the military would support kind of a proletarianization if you're enlisting, moving to the hinterlands, we're becoming the multiracial working class, and that's our political ideology, and we're just have this fantasy view of what working class Americans are like. That's a part of the right's proletarianization, and there's some okay aspects about that. I mean, it is good the right is now paying attention to what working class whites care about. It's getting them out to vote, and it is hampering a lot of that destructive Paul Ryan ideology. So it's not all bad, but at the same time, people just want to be completely downscale in their culture and attitudes, and that's why we now have the insane clown party. But all those people know that welfare is bad. They do view welfare as the enemy, and when they recommend proletarianization, they claim that you're going to be making even more money as a welder or a tradesman than you would ever make coming from college. They promise you the American dream, and the American dream is out in the hinterlands. Now, some people go non-white nationalists, just I guess I wouldn't call them normal conservatives, but right-wingers, non-white nationalists, go so far as like, we need to start moving to trailer parks. This is where your beautiful queen is. I remember there was a video last year where some woman was cooking like real slop for her kids, and then they're like, this is the type of woman you need. This is like what you can find in a trailer park. Of course, she turned out to have a OnlyFans, and I think that all the kids were from multiple men, but in any case, people will go that far. But all the time, they're just like, you are making more money, you're having a better life with this. So when they're advocating for proletarianization, they want all conservatives, because they're still in the multiracial working class mode, to become the working class. White nationalists go the extra step. They want whites to become an underclass, just like blacks. And they want whites to ape black behavior with this. And that's the whole strategy here, is that they view, and this is something that people argue about with white nationalists, or they've said in the past, or anyone who's been like an identitarian and advocated for white identity politics, is that they'll go and like, oh, you just want the Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton mode of politics for whites. You just want your handouts and your gibs, just like blacks do, and that's never going to work with whites. When I reviewed Steve Saylor's book, Noticing, great book, but in his essay on citizenism, he was saying that he wrongly accused Jared Taylor and others of advocating for that mode, and he's like, whites don't actually want that, and that is true. Whites don't want that, as well as most pro-white people like Jared Taylor don't want that. They want a different type of strategy. They don't want gives and handouts. They want autonomy for whites. They want a society that reflects white attitudes and where whites are not, no longer hated, and that they have control of society. That's what they want. There's a degree of independence in that. And the black model is not about independence. It's about complete dependence. It's like you're a spoiled child. They want their people to be a spoiled child that gets everything they want, but they don't have to work, and they don't really have any autonomy and independence. But that's fine as long as they're getting the gives. There are a segment of white nationalists who actually do want to follow that model. And they think that the model for whites is they see blacks and they are just like, this is a successful path to power. We need to become an underclass and we'll get the gibs then. And we'll somehow get all our wildest dreams accomplished. I'm not sure how that is going to happen. But there's a lot to discuss here. I think one thing I have to say is that in general, even if you did have an ideal society, you would not want it to be a full-blown welfare state on the way that Europe is. And now there are a lot of advantages with the welfare state of Europe, and a lot of right-wingers and other types want that for America. We can never have that due to the demographics and the nature of America. But let's say we're more like Norway, and we could theoretically have something like that. Now, it's nice for Norway. I don't think it's terrible for Norway. But a lot of these European countries, once they get a welfare state, the people kind of lose their ambition and drive and energy and dynamic sense when they have that type of welfare state. Because even look at the UK. The UK, when they asked respondents, what are you most proud of for the UK? It's not their history or heritage or ancestors. It was the fucking National Health Service, okay, the NHS. It's this is what we really like. And once you have Gibbs as your national model, there becomes problems with your national identity and how you operate as a country. And also, a lot of people then eventually, if they have such a great welfare state, they don't actually want to do anything with their lives. They just want to, collect their money, collect their dole, sit at home, smoke weed, play video games all day, and that's it. And that's their life. And for a lot of Europeans, they can just, it's, for some people, if you don't want to work, I guess that's nice. But I actually think there's value in work. You want people to work. You want people to have drive. And now I know a lot of jobs aren't great. And I know that most people, if they have hobbies and stuff, it would be better if they could go and not work. But if you had a lot of people who are just not working, what would they do? They would not do anything productive. They would just be smoking weed and playing video games all day. And that's it. You don't want to advocate the neat lifestyle for your whole country. And if you see what Europe is now, it's a lot of them just become content with their station. And that's that. And, it's nice for Europe, but they are having a lot of economic problems now. And a lot of this is due to the heavily regulated nature of their societies and their economy. A lot of this is due to their idiotic energy policies where they're crippling their own energy supply for idiotic moralistic reasons. But it's also that they have this massive welfare state. And they also refuse to actually create real militaries. And if you want to be a real country, you have to have a real military that can defend itself and exert itself on the world stage. That's how you have to be a great power. You have to have a real military. Europe, none of these people really have a real military. They rely on America to provide their defense. And since America provides it for their defense, they then spend it all on the welfare state. And it leads them to be just a colony of America with that mindset. So I think in a lot of ways you don't you don't really want that type of expansive welfare state. I know there's going to be people who are going to be like, oh, that's so libertarian and stupid to have. I'm not advocating that we have no government benefits. Like, I support Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, and even having welfare there. You're gonna have that for exceptional cases. I do believe in strongly reforming these. I'm not a full libertarian in this, and I do think that there should be subsidies more for positive family growth, not just family growth in itself, but getting the people you want to have kids. I think that the government should be involved in that and providing kind of welfare for that. But I think when it comes to having the type of expansive welfare state of Europe, I don't think that's the right mode to go, but we're never going to have that due to the demographics and the nature of American society. And we have a thriving economy. I mean, there are a lot of issues with America, but we do have a dynamic economy. We do have a far more innovation than Europe, especially when it comes to technology. Like, Europe has no real innovation anymore. They make some good products, but there's no pioneering spirit in the way that America does. And there is a positive to that. And even what's happening with America, a lot of the good things that are happening in America are private sphere things, like the private space flights and stuff. That could never happen in Europe, but it does happen in America. So not all of this is due to the welfare state, but I do think that it builds a mindset within the people that they lose a lot of ambition and drive, and it takes away some of the entrepreneurial spirit. Is like, why am I going to go work hard to build a business when I could just go on the dole and play video games all day? You don't want that in mentality. And it's the same why I always really oppose universal basic income, because people need to work. I mean, maybe that's like the Anglo-Saxon in me, but I really think that people need to work. You need to work, because there's a value in it. There is, and even whites do feel that there is an intrinsic self-worth is based within work. Is that you get up, you go to work, you work hard, you're able to support yourself, you're able to build a family, you have a level of independence and pride in what you do, and there is something noble in that. And that's why they don't like welfare, because welfare, you are not just a dependent on someone else, you are also mooching off the productive people. And conservative politics has been, for years and years and years, have been based on this hostility towards welfare and government assistance, because the primary people who are voting Republican, no matter your class, working class, middle class, upper class, all those people feel that you should be working and being productive, not unproductive, not leeching off the system. And they don't like that. I mean, if you go up to any normal white American and say, I'm on EBT, I'm on food stamps, they're not going to fist bump you and say, wow, thank you, white man, for protecting our people. No, they're going to look down on you. They're going to look down on you as beneath them. Rightfully so, because I mean, when I worked at a grocery store years ago, and majority of people who came in with EBT, you realize that they were a low kind of character. And there were tons of whites who came in, and I looked at what I was scanning. It was like candy, it was soda, it was junk food, it was terrible stuff. And they were just like these fat asses. These aren't people who are going, I mean, the idea that these white nationalists are proposing, that it's like all white people buying organic food to feed their extremely Nordic children, is just a complete lie. It's like those, they had all these Wignats like to have this NS propaganda of this strong built white father and the kids, and they're all blonde hair, blue eyed people, and instead they're like that at the grocery store, and they're pull out their EBD card, and it's like, I am that. It's like, none of them are like that. If you're like that, you're likely not even married, and you likely are just buying junk food. In any case, you definitely lose respect for them. And it's because that person is not capable of taking care of themselves. They're relying on you and the taxpayer to do this. And so it's very much an affront to our values and what we believe a good citizen should be. Because as America, we've always wanted our citizens to be independent and able to provide for themselves, not to be dependent on the government. And it is, you almost attain a serf status by going on welfare. I mean, you're not working, that's the difference, but you don't have any independence, you don't have any autonomy. Everything is dependent on the EBT. Now, on the idea that it's going to starve the beast, that is stupid. First off, most of these people are like, money doesn't matter. They can just print more money. But also, if we all go on welfare, it's going to collapse. You gotta pick an option here, and it's absolutely not going to collapse. They would not like anything more than people into race realism and this stuff to lower themselves to poverty level to where they're having to rely on the government. Because one, if you're on welfare, you have zero money to give to the cause. You can't donate to American Renaissance or any of that sort. You can't even go to these conferences. You're so poor. That's it. You're not building financial wealth. There was like guys I mentioned who are like, this is a way to build intergenerational wealth. And that's not how government assistance works. But I don't know. Don't take financial advice from people on the internet. That's all I need to say. But you're not starving the beast through this. First off, the amount of dedicated white nationalists in America, it's like a few hundred. Most of these people who are into this stuff online, they don't practice this stuff at all in real life. People are like saying like, we can get all these dedicated people to go on welfare for base reasons. It's like, you can barely get your own side to not marry non-whites. Okay. It's like a lot of these white nationalists, like, saying the 14 words, and then they've got an Asian or Hispanic wife, and they're like, I don't think this is living up to the 14 words here, mister. But they can't even get them to do those actions like that or to do anything real life. It's just like venting and these like fantasies they conjure up, because most of these people advocating for welfare are not on welfare themselves. And if you actually interacted with these people on welfare, even if it was whites, you would be not wanting to be on that level, because you would see what they are. They degrade themselves. They lose, as I said in my tweet, it's like you do revoke your white card by going on welfare. You're something else when you're there. You lose a sense of that. You lose a sense of what we imagine America is a part of whiteness. It's this kind of upstanding, noble character, a hardworking, middle-class character that you have, and instead you're reducing yourself to something else. Similar with like white criminals in the same way. And if you really see, hardened white criminals and they've got all these tattoos, the way they walk is similar to, black and Hispanic criminals, the way they act and talk, they lose a sense of their whiteness by the same way of lowering themselves to that lumpen proletariat. And by going on welfare, you reduce yourself to the lumpen proletariat as well. But that's what white nationalists want. They want us to be a lumpen proletariat. They want us to be criminal. There's like guys who've always been like, we need to start doing crime. They're like, absolutely not. Like, we are not criminals. Do not. It's too much like they see ghetto blacks and they're like, this is a smart model to emulate. And it goes down the list. It's not just like we want Gibbs just like them. Whites don't ask for Gibbs because they have jobs. They get work. It's like, get a job. Like, that's a fundamental right-wing tone. But for white nationalists, that's anti-white signal, coded language. It means kill. It means white genocide, get a job for them. But, it's like, if you go down the list, like, we already have these things. It's like, whites are, like, a lot of these guys are like, we need our own Kwanzaa. We already have that. It's called Christmas. We need our own Juneteenth. We have that. It's called July 4th. We need our own national anthem. We do. It's already the national anthem. It's a Star Spangled Banner. They go down the list of, like, we already have this stuff. Like, we need our own dashiki. We do. It's called Brooks Brothers. Go buy some and stop looking like a piece of shit. And these guys, they have, it's a very off-putting mentality. It's why very few people are going to get into this stuff. It's like the average normal white American does not want to lower themselves to the underclass, okay? And if your political ideology basically advocates for that, and that's where a lot of these guys who go professional into this stuff, like full-time WNs, that's where they find themselves. Because, I mean, this is not a good thing, but it's like, if you get into this full time, you lose your banking, you lose your access to get payments. It's hard for you to find a job. Even if you're finding like a non-political working class job, they can sometimes fire you. There was like some of these guys who were involved in Seville that like years later they found out they were working in a factory. They got fired from the factory just for something that happened like 5 or 6 years ago when this is occurring. And that's completely wrong. But I'm just saying that a lot of these guys find themselves in that lumpen proletariat. They find themselves living in a trailer park and stuff, and then they want everyone to join in with them, which, this is not an attractive prospect. I mean, most political ideologies are promising a better life for people, not a worse life for people. And nobody wants to slip into the underclass. But there's this kind of admiration for the black underclass because a lot of these WNs, they eventually feel so alienated from mainstream American society that they just want to go, and they can't rise to the upper class. They can't rise to the elite level. So then they fantasize about joining the underclass, and once they all join the underclass, they then can revolt and overthrow the system, which is just not going to happen. I mean, the underclass is not a real threat to the system because most of these people are too stupid to have a political ideology. They're content with porn and weed and whatever entertainments we throw, and they're disorganized. All they care about is getting their candy and their dole. That's it. And so they're not really much of a threat, and they have zero power over any institutions of any sort. We're able to contain the underclass. I mean, it was a problem in the 60s when blacks were starting to organize. They're best and the brightest in the black community. Black nationalists were starting to organize them and getting them to riot and being political activism. But due to welfare and dole, we were able to neuter them. So it's even stupid when you think that these people are going to be more radicalized under EBT. No, they're going to be even more neutered than before because all they're going to have is going to care about base sustenance. And if they're all dependent on the government, they don't want to jeopardize that. That's also the thing. If you're like hoping that all whites go on this to collapse the system, how are people who are entirely dependent on the federal government for their survival going to fare in a collapse situation? It's like, oh yeah, all the welfare cases are going to be much better off in that scenario. But you wouldn't have a collapse because there'd only be a few hundred white nationalists even doing this. They all do this. They're all in like a trailer park. They make themselves even more distasteful to normal white Americans, and nobody's going to want to join that. They're all going to see these people as freeloaders and leeches. And so it's very off-putting because like the average normal white American really does not like government assistance and going on government assistance and seeing that as a high value. It's why they have such a distasteful image of the hood and people like Al Sharpton and all those people demanding Gibbs. They feel like instead of Gibbs, you should work for that. You should earn for that. That's a standard Anglo-American attitude. And this is a clear violation of it. And if these guys truly think that you should loot and do all these things, then why not just shoplift? It's like, just go and get your Cheetos and your 7-Up from the CVS and walk out of it. Because guess what? The base blacks are doing that, and that's how they achieve political power, by looting their CVS's and their grocery stores. I mean, just go shoplift and commit crime. But a lot of these people, they know that that's like too far from them because most of these guys are just really alienated middle class people who are just angry at their job, they're angry at their lives, and they just imagine this fantasy life that's on the other side. They never actually go with these things that they talk about on the internet. And they know that going crime is like, oh, well, I'd actually go to jail for that. And they know that it's distasteful to like shoplift, but they're like shoplifting is on the same wavelength as food stamps and welfare. It's like you are taking from productive people, you are stealing from the rest of society to do this. And it's like, and people are like, we need to milk the cow too. And somebody pointed out, it's like, whites are the cow. We're milking ourselves. You're not just bilking the system that's like totally disconnected from white America. You are taking from white Americans. They want their tax dollars to go to infrastructure and to fire departments and other public services that can be enjoyed by the general population and make their lives better. Instead, they're going to freeloaders and moochers and leeches to do nothing all day. They don't like that. And the answer to this is not for us all to go on welfare, so we're all dependent and neutered and not doing anything. The answer is to reform welfare so more of that money goes to public services we can all enjoy and make society better. Now, this degrading character is also why I don't want, like, I've always been skeptical about proletarianization. I would have to say this, in fairness to the conservative idea about getting a trade job and making a lot of money. I've always talked about how unrealistic these people are. You know, they imagine every plumber's making $250K. A lot of them make decent money that they can raise, you know, a middle class income that they can raise a family. But the level of wealth that people imagine is a little out there. You also, you're not, people also advocate this is the way to power. It's not. It's just a way that, you know, it might be a good option for people if they want a decent income, but there are issues with it. I will say that like there is still a kind of pride in doing this. It's like you are working hard, you're making a good living, you're supporting yourself, you're buying a home, you're doing a lot of the things that we expect that like model citizens should do, as proud citizens should do, as part of the yeoman farmer that Thomas Jefferson imagined. You know, he imagined this whole republic of independent yeoman farmers, you know, taking care of themselves, supporting themselves. You know, they don't have much, but they own what they have and they are able to support themselves. It's kind of a middle class American dream of the early 19th century there, and that's what he imagined for America, and that's replicated today by people having, you know, doing an honest living, supporting themselves, raising a family, owning their own home, and doing that type of stuff. And there's a type, and people are always going to respect that. The underclass model is something completely different, and that's why, you know, some people are like, "Is this a class difference and stuff?" There's no class battle here because working class whites hate this stuff as much as middle class whites. It's why a lot of poor whites refuse welfare. Now you could say that maybe that's not the smartest idea for them to do. Maybe they should. But at the same time, they understand that it's a shame. It's that they lose their whiteness by doing this, that they join the general multiracial underclass by going into that. And they want to preserve their sense of whiteness. And the whiteness is an aspirational identity. It is not an identity that emulates that of the black lower class, where we're, you know, going to prison and we're totally alienated from mainstream society and we build up this kind of our own little ghetto subculture. No, it's an aspirational model where if you achieve full whiteness, you have, you know, a nice happy family, you have a home, you look good, you maintain your appearance, you maintain your standards, and you have a successful life. It is something that where you stand above the lower orders, and that's why, and it's something that you look up to, and that's why it's was able to, you know, guide American society since the founding. But now they're trying to change that. They're trying to change whiteness into post-whiteness as the defining model of America, and we want to resist that. But a lot of people, instead of upholding a nobler, aspirational version of whiteness that is more like WASP and preps and fraternities, they instead want a whiteness based around the trailer park, disability payments, and general sinking into the lumpen proletariat, which you shouldn't have. Now, what forms of welfare? I want to clarify something. I should have clarified this at the beginning of like what we mean by welfare. Not all welfare is bad, or what you consider welfare. Some people are claiming that Social Security and Medicare are welfare, but you paid into that, okay? Old people paid into that. Now, I think that there should be reforms. I mean, and by reforms is that probably the age should be lowered a bit. There are reasons for this, identitarian reasons, in that if you reform Social Security, that there would be less pressure to have more immigrants to pay in. You could resolve that, and it could undermine these claims that we need more immigrants to pay in. Of course, they're not really paying in, but it would help solve a lot of situations if we did that. I don't believe in full privatization. I'm not going full Paul Ryan. I think it should just be raised to like 67 or 68. But you paid into that. You earned that. Okay, that's a benefit you paid into. Unemployment. That's for people who are, you know, they got laid off and they need something to hold them over for the time being. And those are generally productive people who want to work. Unemployment's perfectly fine. There is no shame in taking an unemployment. I actually never took unemployment when I was doxxed, but that's another story. But when you're on unemployment, there is no shame in that, and most people are going to understand that you're taking unemployment. Nobody's going to look. They shouldn't look down on you, okay, for that. So that's all fine, and even Medicaid. If you're qualified for it, you might as well, because healthcare is extremely expensive. So I can understand why people would go on Medicaid. I think Medicaid is probably better than welfare because it's, even for middle class people, it's very tough if they have like serious health problems. Now, the issue with Medicaid is that a lot of people do their own poor health choices that they are, having very expensive problems with that in the healthcare system. But it's more understandable than welfare. Disability is a little bit more complicated because a lot of that is also poor life choices. A lot of them get diabetes and other things because of their diet and other things, and then they can't work. And it also turns a lot of these people into, unproductive sorts. I mean, it's like one reason why that there's been, the quality of life in the hinterlands and the rural America and the heartlands has declined is because all these people are on disability and they're not really being productive even in their communities. It's not like that, oh, now they don't have to work, that they're now focusing on other things. No, they're just at home watching TV all day. They're not being very productive. So that's a little bit more complicated. But when it comes to the other stuff, particularly food stamps and other things, there is a shameful attitude towards it. I think disability, depending on the circumstances, it would still be shameful to be on. Some people have legitimate things, is like they had a working class job and they had such severe injuries through that they can no longer work in what they were doing before. There are cases like that, and maybe they retrain to do something else. But living your entire life on disability, I think, is not something you want to aspire to. So, and this is what all these people think this is something to aspire to. So I just have to put that out there and clarify that not all these things are equal. Sometimes people find themselves in such hard circumstances they have to take these, but there is a shame in it, and it should put a fire in their belly to want to get out of those situations where they're relying on this. And so, contrary to all my critics, it's not a means to gain to build wealth. It is not you're not challenging the system by signing up to be a dependent on the system. You are just neutering yourself and lowering yourself to the lumpen proletariat. You are demeaning your own self-worth. You are making yourself disreputable to normal white Americans that you want to win over. And it's just a part of this extreme alienation, I think, is that it's a problem on the right, where they just view, if we just completely reject society and we move into our own little ghetto, sometimes literally, is that there was one guy saying that we should all march to the welfare center, apply, and then move to the ghetto. It's like, I think you're just becoming black in this case. And so all these guys, they like to imagine themselves as these noble aristocrats who are conquering, that they're the Ubermensch. And then a part of the Ubermensch is to live at a trailer park and live off disability. That's not the Ubermensch, okay? That's something else. That's the Untermensch, okay? And so, I don't know. Some people are into that. There's a lot of silly things on the internet, but you gotta not let them to take over. And the type of white identity we want to uphold and to prioritize and to advance is something that is noble and that is aspirational and is something that people would want to be a part of and that would make their lives better. I mean, the Greer Head Pledge is much better than going on welfare. I almost have to say, I almost want to put "I will not go on welfare" onto the Greer Head Pledge, but I think that I may have to do that eventually. I may want to do that to replace tattoos. Dude, like, I will not go on welfare because there's a whole point of, like, the proletarianization that I want to, to tell people not to go into, because what the proletarianization that's eventually going to happen is that everyone's going to mix together instead of the idea that a lot of WNs have is like, this is going to be a group that's completely homogenous and separate from the other orders, is that the mixing of the groups is happening much more on the working class level than it is happening on the middle class level. I mean, the highest rate of interracial marriage is between whites and Hispanics, and that's generally working class whites and working class Hispanics who are mixing. And a lot of working class whites are starting to emulate Ebonics, or now it's AAVE, and other habits derived from other blacks and Hispanics. And so you're not really upholding whiteness. You're instead embracing a multiracial post-whiteness that is becoming too typical of the American proletariat at the moment. So in conclusion, do not go on welfare. It does revoke your white card. It does remove your whiteness. And the type of whiteness we want is something separate from the prison gang trailer park model that is advocated by a disturbing number of white nationalists. And so that is it. Now, KMAX has another related question to this that we'll go into. Let me pull it up. It is... Hold on. He says, Scott, last week you mentioned the anti-normie side of dissident right people, and this is what leads to this bashing of people doing normal things like dating women, seeing movies, or joining fraternities. In review, does it come from how much the media and Hollywood dehumanizes white people and never caring when we are victims, always highlighting a chance to make us the perpetrator? I would say no. I'll put that up. He's got all the questions. This dehumanization causes those hurt by it to become too school shooter or autistic vibe, or do you think those traits could be there all along? Do you recommend try to be social and positive while trying to convince others of some of the things we'll see wrong? No, it's nothing about victim or stuff. It's like these people are just inherently school shooter or autistic vibe, and this is why they gravitate towards this stuff. I think a lot of people who are on the internet, I think I've pointed out this quote. I forget if I pointed this out quote last week or in the regular episode or maybe the IQ supplement, but I always want to bring up this whenever people are talking about who gets in the right. And there was an interview with Jeff Hanneman of Slayer years ago. This is like from 85, 86 when they were recording Rain and Blood. And he's like, if you're listening to their music, there's something went wrong in your life. And there's something going wrong in your life. And I think that's even true with like right-wing politics. Now, I don't think that this means like their whole life is askew or amiss. Like some people, it's that, maybe they experienced a violent robbery early years, or maybe that there was a formative experience in school. They got, jumped by black kids or something that, there's something always amiss. Now, there are some people who are just like high IQ people, dreamers, who intellectually curious types who are going to gravitate towards big ideas and to, romantic ideas and type of romantic nationalism, I think, of the right. And maybe there's nothing too going wrong on their side. But a lot of people, there's something missing there in their life. And they turn to it. Now, I think the majority of people are not school shooters, I have to say. I just want to say that the majority of people are not school shooters or school shooter types. But we have a number of those people. And that's just the case with all internet cultures. I mean, you have that in gamer culture and anime fans. A lot of those fans then come over to the right. And so these people automatically have this attitude. And, they grew up, they were not the popular kid. They were ostracized. A lot of these kids were bullied, whatever, and that they turned to this stuff in a way to create a fantasy world where that they are now the top dog. They're now the popular one. They're now the one in power, that they can wield their power against those who've wronged them. And I think there's a lot of those people. Now, sometimes, in order to have radical change, you have to have people who feel that there's something wrong going on in their lives, whether it's, they're not able to achieve the type of prosperity they think is owed to them. They're not able to have good jobs, or, everything is in disorder. And this happened, all the time in the early 20th century when people turned to radical politics. It's because they were not able to have the life they feel that they should have. And I think that's like kind of a more of an economic, political thing, large scale thing. Now, for a lot of white Americans, most of them are able to achieve that type of some degree of economic prosperity they think that is owed to them. But I think a number of the people that we have, it doesn't matter what type of society we had, these people would be outsiders and misfits. And so they turn to this stuff because this is ultimately the edgiest, most outsider ideology that there is, and that a lot of these people come to it and embrace it. Now, and I talked about this last week, the dynamic between total normie NPC versus school shooter. And, there's a scale there between the two at the polar ends, two at the poles of it. And some people will want to be, because they see some of the freaks and others, and they want to try to pretend they're NPCs and normies. If you're into this stuff, you're not an NPC or a normie. You are a little bit different. And I remember going, and I've always heard this: if you're into politics as a young person, you are not normal, okay? Because people get into politics as they get older, but for like high schoolers, college kids, even a lot of people in their 20s, they don't aren't very political. They're focused on other things. It's not until they like get into their 30s and get older till they get really into politics. It's very much more of an old man's game than a young person's scene. And this is especially true with right wing politics. Because if you're most young people, if they get into politics, it's going to be something left leaning if they're really political. So everyone's going to be a little not normal. That's fine. But the thing is, you just got to avoid becoming total school shooter and total alienation, and to indulging some of these weird ideas that people are. I mean, you see people like who are lolicons and all this like bizarre, absurd shit that people indulge in and get into, and it's the majority of people aren't going to be like this stuff, okay? And so I think you just always have to avoid that. You're going to have those people in there in the scene no matter what. You just have to kind of keep them in their place and not let them dominate discussion, okay? And dominate discourse. And I think the welfare stuff is into this because all these guys, a lot of them are neats themselves. They don't want to work. And, they're busy all day, watching anime and not leaving their parents' basement. I mean, that people made fun of this stuff in 2016. I don't want to go full Rick Wilson and all the things because that's not the majority of people. But there is a type of person who is like that, who is into this stuff, okay? And you just don't let them dominate the scene. You let the better sorts, the people who know there's something wrong, but are improving themselves and trying to make themselves better than society rather than worse than society and the weaker part of the society. They want to be the real overmensch. They want to overcome society, not sink to the bottom and become the untermensch, like the people demanding for welfare. So that is my opinion on that. Now moving on, we've got a question from Mystery. Mystery asks, it's about the VP question. Hey Scott, I've asked before, but I need the updates on the VP question. For the love of God, tell me it won't be Tim Scott. It will not be. It will not be Tim Scott. It won't be Kristi Noem. The four likely people now are Scott. I don't think so. We're going to eliminate Scott. We're going to eliminate Noem. I think the four likely people are Doug Burgum, J.D. Vance, Elise Stefanik, and Ben Carson. Yes, Ben Carson's in the running. All four of them have their issues. I think if you wanted somebody, it would be Burgum. Looks like his stock is rising the most. I think Burgum might be the best choice because Burgum is inoffensive. He's just a standard, nice establishment Republican. You can't really be that bothered by him. He puts on like a straight man image for Trump. That's really he wanted from Pence. Is like, this is a straight and narrow guy. He's like not wild and crazy like Trump. He's just there. But he's better than Pence because he doesn't have his own really ulterior motives or his own ideology or his own base of support like Pence does. He'd just be there, he'd be a loyal vice president, serve the administration, and Trump would not pick him as his successor. It would just be a guy that everyone kind of likes, and it's fine. Vance would be the other good one. Vance has his own issues, but if you want like a successor who's most in line with Trump ideologically and Trumpism ideologically, Vance would be the best one. But Vance does have a charisma issue. He also was very anti-Trump in the past, but we don't have a ton of good successors right now, and it is good to have somebody who's ideologically aligned with that Trumpism versus just Trump the man or Trump the kind of him as Republican leader. So I think either Burgum or Vance would be fine. Elise Stefanik would be terrible. Her politics are horrible, and she could likely become a successor figure to Trump. And I would have a tough time ever voting for Elise Stefanik. Ben Carson is just not good. He's not going to be a good surrogate. He was already like sleepy and low energy in 2016. I can only imagine how sleepy and low energy he is now 8 years later. It's also just kind of like we've got a base black guy as VP. You really don't want that as your image, so you don't really want him. The reason why they're thinking of Ben Carson because he's like inoffensive. Conservatives like Ben Carson, and no one would mistake him for being the successor, and that's why he would pick him. But I don't think it's going to be him. So I think either Burgum or Vance is who you'd want to be, and it seems that their stock is rising the most out of the VP candidates. Noam is completely out of the picture thanks to her dog killing scandal, which is she's like a she. I've always long said she's a moron, and she proved this with her putting that in there. And she's like, I didn't write this, and it's just been Trump pays a lot of attention to the media, and he knows that she's a total handicap than anything that raises him up. So he's not going to pick her. And then Scott does not want to be a strong defender of Trump, and Trump knows that. And Trump knows he's squeamish about defending Trump and advocating for Trump, while Burgum and the others aren't. So I don't think it'd be Scott. Scott's still in the running, unfortunately. And Scott would be the worst pick. Stefanik would be second worst. Carson would be a bad pick. Burgum or Vance would be fine. There could be somebody else rising up in there. They still want Marco Rubio. I forgot about mentioning Marco Rubio. Actually, he's also in the running too. So there's about 6 people are still serious running. The thing about Marco Rubio is they actually do want to pick. Marco Rubio would also be a bad choice because he would also, like Stefanik, not only is his politics are bad, but he would also could fill in that successor role to Trump in the 2028 election. And they do want to pick him because he's like a really good fundraiser, and he's, the establishment likes him, and he's shore up support from those segments. But the one thing that's saving us is that they're both from the same state. They're both running from the same state. Trump's residency is in Florida. So one of them would have to declare residency elsewhere. Otherwise, they would forfeit those votes in the Electoral College from Florida. And Rubio was asked, would you resign to be VP? And he entertained the idea. I don't know where he would declare residency, maybe D.C. or Northern Virginia, but that would be bad. It's going to be terrible. If you see that Rubio is resigning, you're just like, shit, he is going to be the running mate. And you absolutely don't want Marco Rubio as a running mate. But I think it's too complicated of a process for him to become the VP that they won't pick him. That's also why they're not going to pick DeSantis, is that they would once again have to, somebody would have to move either Trump or DeSantis, or DeSantis would have to resign and declare residency elsewhere. And so he can't really pick anyone from Florida. It's the same as applied to Byron Donalds, another person you shouldn't want picked. So that may save us from Rubio. If Rubio was from any other state, I'd unfortunately put him at the top of the choices for candidate. But thankfully, he's from Florida, and there's a complicated process to make him the running mate. And I think that's why he won't be picked. So he's definitely still in the serious contender. So there's 6 serious contenders at the moment. Noam's completely out. So there's 6 people that are there. There could be other people that are in, like Marsha Blackburn. She's in the running. I don't think he'll pick her because he wants someone young and not close to his age. Marsha Blackburn's only a few years younger than Trump. I think she's in her mid-60s. So he does not. He wants somebody young, and if it was a woman, he wants someone young and good looking. Stefanik's weight actually might sink her chances. So we have to think about that. It's he wants somebody out of central casting. I think that's why he might pick Burgum, because he's a Chad, older, white guy, and he wants his VP to not be his successor. He just wants it to be a stand-in for that role, who looks like he fits the role and will be supportive of Trump. And I think Burgum fits it. So I would put Burgum. If I had to say who's top stock right now, I would say Burgum. And second, I don't know. Second, it would be a 3-way tie between Stefanik, Vance, and Rubio at the moment. So that's the update on VP. It doesn't look so bad. I don't. It does not look like Tim Scott's going to be it. So that's some good news. Now a question from Paul. He says, Scott, I remember you mentioning the same factors making Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania more favorable to Republicans were also in play in Ohio. Now, why are those trends more intense in Ohio, making it a red state compared to states like Wisconsin, which is actually wider than Ohio and is only a swing state? I think the whites in Ohio are a lot more conservative because there's still, there's that southern region of Ohio that's very close to the South itself. A lot of those people migrated from the South. There's areas that are, bordering West Virginia, and it's where, J.D. Vance is from. That's very like downscale whites who are very strong Republican voters. Even the Cincinnati area has always been a very kind of Republican area, and the suburbs at least. And I think it's also, Wisconsin's wider, but it's also Ohioans have experienced blacks more, while also having a lot kind of more of those rural southerners and its rural parts in comparison to Michigan and Wisconsin. So it's a different type of white. A lot of those whites in Wisconsin are Germans, and not to sink on Germans, but Germans are. Though they generally have weirder voting patterns, and look at Minnesota, for instance, which is also very Scandinavian German, and they're not around a lot of diversity, and they'll be able to be convinced to vote for Democrats because it's a nice thing to do, or maybe for their specific interests they have. But that's it. But Ohio's always been a battleground state. In 2004, when Bush lost all these Rust Belt states, he won Ohio. And so it's been a battleground state forever, since the founding almost, or since politics became. I'd have to look at some of the voting patterns of the antebellum era more closely, but it was always a important state in play, especially post Civil War, and they would always just pick random. Both Democrats and Republicans would try to pick someone from Ohio in order to win Ohio. It was always seen as the prime battleground state, and that has carried on into the modern era. Now it's becoming more of a close red state. I think it's just a stance of different whites, greater awareness of diversity, and and the way that it's similar to the South is that it's a lot of these Southerners, they see that their cities have been entirely taken over by blacks. It's the same in Ohio, because it's not just like one city like it is in primarily Michigan or in Wisconsin. It is multiple cities in Ohio that are like that. So greater awareness, a little bit different type of white that is there, more of a long-term Republican Party structure that didn't get completely wiped out in the mid 20th century in some places like Michigan and Wisconsin. Just different like local politics as well. I think it's just you have a different type of white. Yeah, due to the higher level of diversity, I think it's made Ohioans similar to white Southerners, and that in response to diversity, they become more conservative and more right-wing and more likely to vote Republican there. But also the same factors: declining unionization, union members, more of the young college-educated whites going to other states, and these same trends that are happening in Michigan and Wisconsin are also happening in Ohio. But it's more intensely red because it's been more of a battleground state for a much longer period of time. Wisconsin and Michigan, I think the last time before Trump was maybe 88 that they had gone for a Republican. Well, Ohio was always bounced back and forth, and they always said that this is a critical state to win when Obama was running for president and when Trump was running for president, even though Trump won Ohio handily in 2020. Didn't end up securing the election, but that's another story. So I would say that those are the factors for Ohio. Different type of white, more diversity leading to greater preference for conservative policies. It's had a stronger Republican Party there, a more competitive Republican Party there than Michigan and Wisconsin have had in the latter 20th century. It's been more of a battleground state for a longer period of time, and then it just moved over. But also having the same factors that are making Michigan and Wisconsin more competitive. Then we have a question from Werner. You could call him Werner, but I'm going to call him Werner because he's the name of the pseudonym is after a German figure, so I'm going to call him Werner. And this is a topic I could do a whole episode on, so I'm only just going to briefly answer this question there. I may do this next week. I'm probably going to do this soon. This is a topic I always return to, but I'll now present it. What do you think the vision of the right Republican Party will be post-Trump? Maybe this would be a good topic for an IQ Summit. It would be a good topic for a whole episode. Seems like the Republican Party without Trump going forward will be a rudderless ship. It's hard to tell right now. You know, if I was asked in early 2023, I would have said if Trump loses in 2024, or he was never going to lose the primary, but let's say he lost in 2024, that the party would go through a de-Trumpification. I think that's impossible at this point. Trump has completely taken over the Republican Party. He has a tighter grip on the Republican Party than he had at any point of his presidency. The RNC is run by his daughter-in-law, okay? And the other co-chair, the other leader, is like a fervent Trump backer. The party, the RNC, the infrastructure and institutions are controlled by Trump loyalists. All of these figures who may have said that they were critical of Trump before, they're now all begging and bending the knee for Trump. There's like this guy, Bob Good, who is a decent congressman, but he made a very poor decision and who he should back in the primary. He backed DeSantis, and once DeSantis dropped out, he immediately became a Trump supporter. He's like, oh, I'm a huge Trump fan. I love Trump. I'm such a huge supporter, when he had just been attacking him and saying DeSantis is going to win the primary. He was saying this stuff like after Iowa when DeSantis clearly didn't win. He's like, oh, DeSantis is going to win. And then the next week he's like, oh, I love Trump. I'm so supportive of Trump. All these guys are bending the knee. The fact that Mitch McConnell is endorsing Trump and people like that are endorsing Trump just shows that they know that the party is completely controlled by him, that there's no challenger to him. So if Trump loses, he's still going to control the party and influence the party. And it's still going to be going in a Trump direction. Now, how does that look? And it also depends on who are the succeeding leaders of the party when Trump's there. The thing is, he's still going to be an important figure when even if he loses. And if he's going to go on trial too, he's likely going to go on trial for something after the election if he somehow lost. I have to say this, I am pretty confident he's going to win. So this, I think that this is less of a problem to worry about. I'm increasing my chances. I say it's usually 60%, but I'm almost going to 70%. I want to see what happens with this hush money trial. I think it's not going to have much of an impact, and I think it might, even if he is convicted, it might be overturned on appeal. And so to fully, stress, I'm not going to lower my percentage from it, but it's still remaining a solid 60%. And if he wins, the party is going to just be permanently like Trump. It's going to be even more than how Reagan transformed the party in the 80s. Like, there's going to be a reverence for Trump and a desire to drape themselves in the mantle of Trumpism among all Republicans that will even be stronger than it was with Reagan. Far stronger than it was for Reagan, to be honest. And so the party will be fully made in his image. But even if he loses, the party will still be Trumpified. The difference is what direction will the party take? Will it be a party of kind of, the J.D. Vance, and we're now making a more respectable Trumpism or of that sort? Or will it be more in type of Mark Robinson, Kerry Lake? We embrace the type of culture and style of Trumpism, but the politics and ideology don't really matter. That depends on who's winning and who's taking the forefront. And I don't really see a lot of good leaders emerging to succeed Trump at the moment, but that could change. And also, I think Trump's going to have one reason that people thought that the party was de-Trumpifying after 2020 is because Trump was censored everywhere. He's banned from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere. It was hard for him to have his voice out there. But I think now with the declining censorship, people, the right hears him much more and they see his voice, and there's no one really challenging his grip on power. And I think that's going to carry, even if he somehow lost the 2024 election. So I would say this: it's hard to fully think this, and I'm going to give my further thoughts on this in a future podcast down the road very soon. But I think the one thing I want to point out right now is that it's not going to be de-Trumpified. It's going to be very hard to de-Trumpify the party. Even if they blame Trump for the loss, I think they are having a much harder time blaming Trump for the loss, because you saw all these Republicans like, oh, if we just had another candidate, if we just had someone else, and now they're seeing the polls and like, oh, actually, he's doing really well in the polls. And I think they're going to realize that if he does lose, that there's something there. It's either these idiotic indictments that they see as politically motivated, or they see abortion. And I think that those are going to be more of the takeaways than from 2022, which they stupidly all blamed on Trump. I think they're going to have a harder time blaming it on specifically Trump the individual this time. They're going to try, but I think there's going to be less of an appetite for it. I think more of the people are going to see that they play political games, or they're rigging the elections and other things of that matter. I think it's going to be less blaming on Trump, and I think it's going to be harder for there to be a major push against Trump after 2024 versus what they try to do in 2022. So that's a little bit of a white pill, I guess I want to say. So I will definitely return to this topic again in the very near future. So that's it. So I'm going to conclude with New England refugee. He's had two questions, but we're saving up the other one for the mailbag. He said, "Hey Scott, any thoughts on the cold winter theory? Mr. Taylor taught me the idea, and it pretty much explains history. The theory is that due to Europeans and others, primarily Europeans, is that we developed higher intelligence than others, is because we had experienced cold winters and we had to, think more long term and have a lot more planning involved and develop a lot of habits that were naturally inclined to building civilization." And so this is a basic theory of it. So yeah, I 100% believe it. I don't know. I don't really get too much into the scientific stuff, but I generally accept it and believe it. They just don't excite me into wanting to go on a whole rant on it. But I totally believe it as a theory. It makes sense. And so I would fully accept it. I know that's a very short answer. But yes, the answer is yes. My thoughts on it, I believe it. It makes sense. It seems to explain a lot of things, a lot of the differences we see between groups in the world. So that is it for this highly respected. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed. We're going to have a great column tomorrow, a great mailbag on Wednesday, and even greater column on Thursday, if that's possible. It'll be at least equal, and then an amazing IQ supplement on Friday. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.